They're beautiful things, aren't they? And they represent the epitome of internal combustion engine development and, of course, piston-powered aircraft. And aircraft such as these and a number of others that are flying around the world were developed as a result of the stimulus given to technology by the advent of the Second World War. And their development started in the early 30s. Now, for many years in Australia, we saw no warbirds in our skies. It was against the law to fly warbirds. But a movement started up about 25 years ago in America and in other parts of the world to restore World War II aircraft. That includes fighters and bombers, and also some transport aircraft and support and liaison aircraft. And this movement gained momentum and grew to the extent where it became clear that it was going to spread to Australia. So some concessions were made in this country about the flying of this type of aircraft. And a movement has sprung up which has given the world a couple of unique aircraft, and which has given the world a fleet of restored World War II warbirds which can stand alongside any restoration done anywhere in the world as far as its quality is concerned. In fact, the quality of these aircraft is at least as good as they were when they were factory fresh, and in some cases quite considerably better. They truly are superb restorations and magnificent examples of the age of technology that they represent. Now, foremost among these restorers are Col Pay, who lives in Scone in central New South Wales and who has a Mustang and Australia's only flying Spitfire and a number of other aircraft, and also Guido Sakoli, who lives in Toowoomba in Queensland and who also has a stable of absolutely magnificent aircraft. Now, we're going to talk to these men. We're going to find out what motivates them, what makes them love the aeroplanes as much as they do, and we're going to look at more of that beautiful footage of the aircraft flying. But there's more than that in this video. We're also going to travel from England to Australia aboard the replica of the Vickers Vimy, which was flown along that route from England to Australia by Ross and Keith Smith in 1919. The replica was built by Lang Kidby and Peter Macmillan. They did a superb job of recreating a large and fairly complex aircraft and of flying it all of that distance. So we'll be looking at that, we'll be looking at its development and flying with them. We'll also be flying an aerobatic routine with the RAAF Roulettes, the aerobatic display team, and we'll be looking at other aspects of sport and recreational flying in Australia. So get set for some real action. Now, before we formally meet and talk to Guido Sakoli and Col Pay and a number of other people, I guess I should fill in some background as to how this video came about. We were approached during 1994 by Kim Rolfe-Smith, the organiser of the 1994 Wings and Wheels Airshow at Archerfield Aerodrome in Brisbane. Now, Kim owns and flies the T-28, in fact the T-28 which you'll see in these pictures, and he also went to a lot of trouble to make this airshow as good as it could possibly be. It's run every second year, and it wasn't without its problems, because after 18 months or so of beautiful weather caused by the terrible drought that we've experienced in Australia in the last couple of years, the first day of the airshow was the first time it had rained in Brisbane for all of that time. And in fact, the Saturday was effectively rained out. But the people who'd come a long way with their aeroplanes to display them, and also the patrons who'd come to watch the air display, were very patient and came back on the Sunday, which was a bright and sunny day. Now, virtually all of the activities of both days were packed into the Sunday, so it was one of the most action-packed and well-patronised air shows we've seen in Queensland in many years. In fact, that goes for pretty well the east coast of Australia. Now, the airshow, as its name suggests, combined two elements, and that is wings, of course that's the aircraft, and wheels, which was the display of vintage cars mounted by a number of various car clubs from around the Brisbane area. And if anything goes together well, it's aeroplanes and motor cars, particularly vintage motor cars with aeroplanes, because even with our most modern general aviation aircraft, the technology on which they're based was generally established in the 30s. The engines that power them were designed and built in the 30s and 40s, and the airframes haven't changed much. So the 1930s and 40s motor cars fit together very well with the aeroplanes, and a superb display of these cars was mounted. But that wasn't all that was there. Archerfield is home to one of Australia's only Neptune restorations. Now, there is a flying Neptune in Australia, but this is the second aircraft to be restored by a group of enthusiasts from Brisbane, and they've been working long and hard for quite a long time to get this aircraft up and flying. That looks like taking another few years, but they assure me with absolute certainty that this Neptune will fly once again in the future. There are also displays from some of the ultralight aircraft manufacturers from around Australia. The Jabiru was flying, as was the Skyfox, and Howard Hughes had a superb display of his magnificent Lightwing, which is built in Ballina in northern New South Wales, and which has spread all over Australia and even to overseas countries, as well as flying his home-designed, indigenously designed power chute. Now, this involves a power pack mounted on the pilot's back, a fairly standard glider-type parachute, tunnel-type parachute, with a couple of control lines, and it's quite astonishing the degree of control that the pilot has over this fairly rudimentary flying machine, and I assure you, having flown the machine, that it's as near as you'll ever get to being a bird, because the shrouds are attached to your shoulders just as wings would be if we could fly. You can't see the chute overhead unless you look up, so you're effectively suspended totally in mid-air. It really is an experience to fly, and remarkably easy to fly. And of course, one of the advantages is that your parachute is inflated before you actually leave the ground, so that means that it's one of the safest forms of flying. Ausflight Aviation from Boona also mounted a display of drifter aircraft, one of the best ultralights built currently in the world. The Drifter A503 and its derivatives were originally built from an American imported drifter. Drifters are no longer manufactured in America, but they're certainly manufactured in Australia and exported all over the world. There were displays of home-built aircraft. There were a number of helicopter displays, including this quite spectacular drop of a motor car, which was reportedly wrongly parked and which was punished accordingly by being dropped from about 500 or 600 feet by a helicopter, and the results, of course, are quite obvious. Now, these air shows are never easy to organise, and that they require a tremendous amount of coordination. And one of the things that has to be coordinated is that the pilots have to know what is required of them when it comes their time to fly in their particular slot. They have to know the box of airspace in which they have to operate, and of course there are certain basic rules such as you never fly over the crowd or never fly towards the crowd as well. And the briefing was conducted in thorough form by the CAA officials who were present, and all of the pilots knew at the end of the briefing in no uncertain terms exactly what was required of them, and furthermore they conformed to those requirements perfectly. Now, no air show would be complete without an aerobatic routine, and we were privileged to see a display by the brand new Russian Sukhoi aerobatic machine at this air display, as well as a fine display by Chris Spitfire, who showed us for the first time in Queensland his special airshow act, where he cuts a ribbon with the tip of the fin of his pitch special, which is inverted with the tip of the fin around about 20 feet off the ground. Chris Spitfire has been flying aerobatic aircraft for many years, and we'll be talking to Chris a little later in this feature. Now, a little more about the airshow a bit later, because there are a couple of highlights of the airshow which have to do with our warbird presentation in this video. But before we go any further, let's visit Guido Sakoli, Australia's foremost warbird restorer and flyer. Guido is based at Toowoomba on the Darling Downs, and he has an operation there called Aerotech, which he uses not only to restore his own aircraft, but also to restore aircraft for other people. Well, Guido Sakoli, your name is famous throughout the world because of what you've done for the warbird movement in Australia with your restoration of all of these beautiful aeroplanes. What got you started?
Well, some of these aeroplanes came available in the early 80s, and at the time we were heavily involved in aerobatics. And it seems to us that it was sort of the obvious step on from that.
From aerobatics?
From aerobatics on.
The reason that you chose warbirds, was that because you were appreciative of the history of the aircraft, the military history of the aircraft, or was it because of the aerodynamics and the power and that sort of thing?
Well, no, I'm just getting older, and I find that I need more and more horsepower to get things done the way I want.
Right.
No, it's I've always wanted a Mustang, a P-51. It has been my lifelong dream.
Yes.
and we searched high and low. As my unlimited aerobatic interest sort of started dwindling, I thought that was the time to get what I always wanted. Unfortunately, at the time, we just couldn't find one.
Right.
And this Sea Fury came on the market.
Yeah.
So we got 3 of them.
Right. That's the Iraqi ones.
The Iraqi ones, and we got Nobby Bash in Darwin rebuilt all 3 of them, and I finished up keeping one.
Yes. And of course, the sale of the other 2 helped to finance the acquisition and restoration of the other aircraft.
Oh, in a roundabout way. I mean,
yes.
it's,
So what's in the stable now?
We've got the Fury going, we've got the Fiat, as you can see there, the Boomerang, we've got the T6, we've got a T28,
right,
which I'm going to take delivery of next week. Now we have just finished it in Darwin.
Right.
And then we got an A37
right,
that needs a few years work on, and we just started on a Tiger mod.
Right. What a wonderful collection of aeroplanes, or selection of aeroplanes.
Yeah.
So what about, you really fly these aeroplanes for air shows, don't you?
That's the only.
You fly them for pleasure at all?
Well, I like to fly them, of course, but the cost it's almost prohibitive now.
Yes.
We sort of try to combine the opportunity to fly them by going to the Airshow.
What about the future of warbirds in Australia? Do you see a good future for them?
Well, there's been a great leap forward in the last 6 or 7 years, as you know. And like any other great leap forward, as the Chinese discover, there's always some
steps back.
Some setback.
Yes.
And I think once this problem that are being attended to now will be ironed out, we'll be back on course for another good expansion phase of it.
Because it's taken a long time. I mean, I remember when I was learning to fly in 56 at Bankstown, VHBOY, the P-51 used to tow targets, and then we saw no warbirds airborne in Australia for many, many years. And then people such as yourself started to push the department, and the movement picked up overseas, and now we're seeing these aircraft, these beautiful aircraft flying again. So really, we can only move forward from here.
I'll say so. Certainly, the general public seem to be very appreciative of the opportunity to see this aeroplane, not only on the ground. I mean, we are really not into static display. No. I mean, we either fly the aeroplanes or we lose interest very quickly on them.
Yes.
So we have been able to offer the public some good flying exhibits. At the same time, they can sign flying.
It's living history.
Well, it is, and they are great-looking aeroplanes. I mean,
wonderful things.
In anybody's book, it's the sort of, well, to me, they sort of epitomize this certain era of the Second World War and the end of it in a very graphic way.
And of course, the ultimate development of piston engines, whether they be radial, air-cooled, or inline liquid-cooled, it really was something. I mean, those engines have something that no turbine could ever have, no matter how well they develop them. They just have an aura about them. And the aircraft that they pull around have a similar sort of aesthetic appeal, don't they? Wonderful things.
It's a great combination, and I only hope that we can be in the position for many years to come to keep them operational and to show them around. Spare parts are certainly drying up in many.
Yes, you've got to manufacture.
Technology is also advancing, so there are avenues. If we were to proceed with honourable intentions, with intelligence options, I'm sure that we can keep them flying for a long time to come.
Well, Guido, I'm sure on behalf of every aviation enthusiast that ever sees this vision, let me thank you for the wonderful job you've done for warbirds in Australia. Thank you, Guido.
Thank you.
Now, as Guido says, he's not interested in static restorations, and all of the aircraft in his stable fly and are demonstrated at air shows. Now, obviously, you can only fly one aeroplane at the one time. Guido specialises in the Sea Fury, and he has a couple of pilots who have been trained to handle the 2 other aircraft. Now, Wayne Milburn flies the Boomerang, which is the only genuine flying boomerang in the world, and obviously that's quite a demanding task and requires a huge degree of responsibility on the part of the pilot. I asked Wayne what the Boomerang's like to fly.
Well, it's a great aeroplane. It can get very heavy. When you get the speed up in the machine, it gets very heavy, and also it's quite a handful on the ground when the speed gets down, and it's got a very large cowling on it, so once the tail comes down you can't really see ahead of you at all. So. But it's a great aeroplane. It's a real thrill to fly it, and yeah, I couldn't wish to fly a nicer aeroplane.
And certainly it's historic. I mean, really, it's quite a remarkable aeroplane. It's the only really original boomerang in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There's another couple being built in Brisbane here, which should be flying in another few years.
You fly other aeroplanes in Guido's stable?
Yes, I've flown the Fiat a number of times, and the T6, and we have another couple of aeroplanes, a Pitts and a Falco that we have in Toowoomba, and also the T28.
Now, in its own way, the Fiat is just as unique as the Boomerang. There are 4 Fiats left in the world. They're all G59s, and 2 of them will never fly again. One of them is flying in a museum in Italy. But Guido had a long look at the Fiat lineage and discovered that the same basic airframe was shared by the Fiat G56, which fought in the northern desert during World War II. The differences being the fact that the 56 was a single-seater and it had a DB601 inverted V12 German engine, whereas the G59 had the Rolls-Royce Merlin. So he decided to convert the G59 to a very accurate representation of the World War II G56. That entailed modifying the cockpit to make it a single-seater and changing its colour scheme to represent an aircraft of the northern African desert during World War II. I spoke to Matt Handley, who's the pilot of the G56 and who incidentally is Guido's son-in-law, and asked him about the history of the aircraft.
The aeroplane was rebuilt by Guido Sakoli from Toowoomba. It originally came, of course, from Italy, and it was built out of bits and pieces from different Fiats that he managed to get hold of while he was over there. And it flew in around about 1988 for the first time, and it's been flying at Australian airshows ever since.
Now, it's got the famous Rolls-Royce Merlin. How does it compare? I mean, have you flown other Merlin-powered aircraft?
No, this is the only Merlin-powered aeroplane that I've flown, and it's very nice to fly. It's good.
What about its manoeuvrability, general handling?
Yeah, handling is very good, comparable to most of the other aeroplanes that had Merlin engines in them during World War II, and it's a delight to fly. It's very not a hard machine to fly, but you've got to respect it. It's not an aeroplane that you can get in and not know what you're doing. You've got to be on the ball.
Sooner or later, everybody who flies will look longingly at somebody flying a competition-level aerobatic routine. Now, the perception is a long way away from the reality because it is tremendously demanding physically to fly one of these aircraft at this level. And it's entirely different from hopping in a Tiger Moth or a Cessna 150 Aerobat or a Chipmunk or a Citabria and wandering out to the training area and flying a couple of lazy loops and rolls. These aircraft exert forces upon themselves and upon the pilot which require an extremely high level of physical fitness in order to be able to resist them. Now, for nearly 60 years, an astonishing period of time, the Pitts Special has been the standard by which all other aerobatic aircraft have been judged. And in recent years, some unbraced monoplanes have come onto the world aerobatic scene, usually and generally out of the old USSR, Soviet Russia, and Central European countries. Aircraft such as the Sukhoi and a couple of others, the Zling trainers, have been making inroads, mainly because they're no more manoeuvrable than the Pitts is, but they have an elegance about them which the Pitts lacks. It's so small and tiny, and it does everything so quickly that it looks a little like a blowfly in a bottle. But nevertheless, the Pitts biplane has been the standard by which all aerobatic aircraft have been judged. Now, the world competition scene has bred a type of aeroplane which is effectively unique. There are very special requirements if an aircraft is to be competitive in flying aerobatics. It has to be inherently unstable. In fact, some of these aircraft are just as difficult to fly straight and level as they are to fly through an aerobatic routine because they have to have inherent instability. They have to have a tremendous power to weight ratio to enhance their vertical upward performance, and they have to also be able to come downhill relatively slowly. Now, in the Pitts, that's handled by the fact that it has an inbuilt drag profile, being a biplane. In the modern aeroplanes, it's generally handled by a large propeller which has variable pitch, so that acts as effectively an air brake when the aircraft is coming downhill. Now, they also have to have tremendous structural integrity, and in the case of the Pitts, that was handled very nicely by the fact that it was a biplane. So the braced cell that was represented by the two wings with their interplane struts and their wire bracing gave the aircraft their inherent structural strength. Now, Australia is fortunate in having a number of aerobatic champions. Among them, our champion of champions is a gentleman named Chris Sparrow, and we took the opportunity of talking to Chris during the Wings and Wheels Airshow. Chris, speaking of competition flying, you've dedicated your life to aerobatics. What got you started in that?
Oh, it goes way back to when I was a kid, working on the West Coast, or living on the West Coast at Ceduna. And the old warbirds used to stage through there and land at Ceduna for fuel, going to the west or coming through from the west. I got the bug for flying then, and didn't want to join airlines or Air Force. I just wanted to go and do my own thing, which I continue to do now. And I got stuck into aerobatics with the Royal Aero Club, flying Chipmunks, then Vickers, and then Fugees. And of course the famous Pitt Special came along. That was in '72 when I went to France and met up with Art Scholl and flew his Pitt Special. And then a couple of good friends decided to buy Pitts and bring it to Australia. And I got into the competition scene then. From about '68 onwards, flying Vickers and Chipmunks until the Pitts came onto the scene. I won the Australian title 13 times.
Putting aeroplanes through third-dimensional movements in the way in which you do is hugely demanding on your body. I mean, those negative Gs, particularly in the outside loops, and being able to keep your orientation in doing a 360-degree rolling turn and things like that are hugely demanding. What keeps you up there? What makes you continue to want to strive to get better?
Well, I just get a lot of satisfaction. Well, first of all, the satisfaction I derived from all that was to be able to put an aeroplane through its maximum parameters, yes, and to be able to control it, and then when you get to your pinnacle, it's like an extension of yourself. Yes. It's not an aeroplane. No. You want to do something and say, I'm going to do that, and you do it, yes, and the aeroplane becomes you. And that is, if you hit that in life, it's one of the best feelings. Yes.
Very few people, yes, achieve that perfection.
Exactly. Of course, I've now got this ribbon cut, inverted ribbon cut. Yes. That's something that I've been striving to get. 10 years I've been pushing the department, and eventually they gave it to me.
And that's an inverted low-level ribbon cut?
Yes, that's right. I've got two poles, about 50 feet apart, and I stretch at 20 feet high, 25 feet high, and there's a ribbon between them, and 4 balloons tied in the centre of that ribbon, and that droops, of course, to about 20 feet. And I approach it at high speed, roll inverted about 20 feet off the ground, and eyeball the balloons and head straight forward. You can't look at anything else. If you look at the ground, it'll just drag you in. So you've got to eyeball the balloons and trust the guys at the other end have put them up the right height. And it's controlled, it's precision flying, and I've not yet known anyone to come to grief doing it.
It's absolutely magnificent footage and superb action, and of course it's the RAAF's aerobatic demonstration team called the Roulettes. Now, it didn't take long after the Wright brothers' first flight for people to realise that aircraft share with submarines a unique quality, and that is the ability to move in 3 dimensions. Now, I haven't seen a submarine doing aerobatics recently, but aircraft, of course, have been doing aerobatics almost from that first flight. In fact, I well remember the story of a gentleman named Lincoln Beachy, who toured America and Europe flying loops in his Blériot-style monoplane. Unfortunately, seatbelts hadn't been invented at that time, and Lincoln ultimately fell from his Blériot on the top of a loop when he put on a bit of negative G, and that was the end of his activities. But it wasn't the end of aerobatics, and the First World War gave an impetus to aerobatics, which was caused, of course, by the establishment of the basic techniques of dogfighting, aircraft against aircraft, man against man, and that is where aircraft design finally got to the stage where aircraft were able to be designed with structural strength and aerodynamic qualities that enabled them to be aerobated. Now, as I said, aerobatics is the basis of all fighter-type aerial fighting, and air forces around the world since almost those days, in fact certainly since the early 30s, where the RAF used to fly Gloucester gauntlets which were actually tied together from the time they left the ground to the time they landed again, in aerobatic displays to show their prowess and their expertise, and also of course to aid in recruiting. And the RAAF's team is the Roulettes, as we've just seen, and they fly the Pilatus PC-9 trainer, which is of course the RAAF's latest trainer, an absolutely superb fighter-style turbine-powered aeroplane which has almost unlimited vertical performance and which is a magnificent machine with which to fly the sort of tight formation precision routines that you see being flown here. Now, some of this footage was supplied very kindly by the Roulettes, the rest of it we shot ourselves. Let's sit back, go aboard the aeroplane and enjoy the sights and the sounds.
We perform about 30 different shows around here, including about 60 Gs. This means feelers, 6 times the speed of normal gravity, means it weighs about 420 kilos. 6 on the team are following themselves. Yes. The team are now just pulling up into a loop, into the formation.
This next segment in our video is very dear to my heart. I've been involved in aviation all my life, building models. In fact, I still build models. I started when I was about 5. And in my late teens, I moved into home-built aircraft. Now, home-built aircraft are built in every country in the world in huge numbers. In fact, at this time, there are more home-built aircraft on the US register than there are factory-built aircraft, which is really quite a remarkable statistic. And modern home builds are pushing the frontiers as far as building materials and power plant technology is concerned. And of course, as a result of that, I move around to the fly-ins and the air shows, and I attended one at Caloundra on the Queensland Sunshine Coast early in 1980 and met a gentleman named Lang Kidby who was flying a beautifully restored Piper Cub. Lang and I became friends. We share flying experiences. In fact, Lang flew his club alongside my Super Sparrow here during its first flight a couple of years ago. And he also ran the England to Australia Vintage Air Race in 1990. Now, that was about 28 vintage aeroplanes raced in loose formation from England to Australia. And during that event, he met an American gentleman named Peter Macmillan, and they became very good friends. And early in 1993, Lang rang me up and he said, "I've got a new project." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Peter and I are going to build a replica of the Vickers Vimy, and we're going to fly it along Ross and Keith Smith's route from England to Australia." Now, that was a mammoth undertaking, whichever way you look at it. Firstly, the aircraft is mammoth. It's around about 70 feet wingspan. It's a very complex multi-bay biplane, and it has twin engines. And from any point of view, to design from scratch using the original factory drawings, but to redesign the structure to use modern materials, to find power plants and to actually physically build that aeroplane was a huge undertaking, let alone the flight. Now, Ross and Keith Smith were lucky. They were given their aircraft and it was specially modified for the England to Australia flight. And the significance of this flight has effectively been forgotten as far as aviation historians are concerned, particularly in Australia, because that was the flight that opened up the airline route from England to Australia and, of course, vice versa. And it was on that foundation that most long-distance world airline flight systems were built. And Ross and Keith Smith, along with Bennett and Shears, their mechanics, did a superb job of flying this large and cumbersome and difficult to live with aeroplane, mainly because of its engines, which I'll talk about in just a moment, all that way in a relatively short time and to do it easily. Now, they were paid by the Australian government through Billy Hughes, our then Prime Minister, a prize of £10,000, which is roughly the equivalent of $1 million in today's money, and that was a very good prize, and it was certainly a well-deserved prize. Now, Lang had often mentioned over the years the fact that the exploits of Kingsford Smith had overshadowed, eclipsed if you like, the exploits of the Smith brothers. Now, Kingsford Smith certainly did a magnificent job opening up the Trans-Pacific route, but the England to Australia route was the one that really mattered, because that was the direction in which most people were travelling, from England to Australia and vice versa. So this project was dear to Lang's heart because it would highlight the activities of aviation pioneers whom he greatly respected and whom he believed, rightly, had made a major contribution to world aviation. So the project was begun. Now, initially, it was intended that the Vimy be built in Australia. It'd be an Australian project. And in fact, Bill Whitney, an Australian aircraft engineer, was contracted to look at the original drawings and to redesign the fuselage for construction in 4130 steel tube rather than the original wire-braced wood, and also to look at the design of interplane struts and the overall structural design of the aircraft. And those activities were undertaken in Wayne Daly's workshop at Brown's Plains in Brisbane. Now, Wayne has an establishment which builds high-performance racing car chassis and which also prepares engines for racing cars, drag races and circuit races. So Wayne was the ideal man to look not only at building the structure, but also to working up engines. Now, the original Vimy was powered by 360 horsepower Rolls-Royce Eagle V12 engines. And they were beautiful engines, but they were extremely heavy, and because of the age in which they were built, they tended to be unreliable. And one of the major problems that Ross and Keith Smith had with their England to Australia flight was in engine reliability. So Wayne decided, along with Bill and Lang, that 454 cubic inch Chev engines would be ideal for this particular project. Now, there's a lot of argument in the world of aviation about the suitability of automotive engines for aircraft use. And there have been a lot of conversions, the classic among them, of course, being the Volkswagen, but we also have Subaru engines and some of the American Buick V8 engines, which originated as the Rover V8 and Jaguar V8 in England, and a couple of others, Honda engines, for instance, have all been converted with varying degrees of success to power aircraft. One of the problems is that these engines are designed to develop their maximum torque at horsepower at revs which are much higher than an aircraft propeller can be driven to give maximum efficiency, so they have to be gear driven. Now, that's either gear driven or belt driven. In the case of the 454 Chevs, Wayne Daly developed the engines so that they would deliver maximum torque at about 4,000 revs per minute, And he also designed and engineered an epicyclic reduction gearbox which would gear the drive down to the quite huge 10'6" diameter wooden propellers. Now, the propellers were built by Dick Sweetapple in his workshop in Brisbane. The fuselage and empennage were built by Wayne Daly in Brisbane. But by the time the project had gotten to that stage, around the middle of 1993, it was quite clear that the Australian CAA would not let the aircraft fly in time for it to commemorate Ross and Keith Smith's trip on its 75th anniversary. So the fuselage and engines and empennage and other parts were flown to America by Qantas, who did a superb job of supporting the project, and work recommenced in a hangar on an airfield which was donated by the US Air Force free of charge near San Francisco in America. Now, the wooden wings were exactly identical to the originals, and they were built in America. The aircraft was erected in America, and it was test flown in the States. Now, the pictures you're looking at now are a fairly murky VHS reproduction of the first flight, during which the computer control on the right engine became confused and ran the engine full reach. So Lang effectively had to shut that engine down, but he found that the lightly laden Vimy flew quite perfectly on one engine, and he was able to continue the test flight. Around about 50 hours of test flying were put on the aircraft in early 1994, and then it was loaded aboard a USAF C-5A Galaxy and flown to the Farnborough Air Display in September 1994. The last day of the Farnborough Air Show saw the departure of the Vimy from England to Australia. Now, this aircraft is really quite remarkable. It's a big aircraft. It has one of the most imposing presences of any machine I've ever been in the company of. It really is really something to be near this aircraft. But quite remarkably, because of the overall reliability of the engines and because of the way in which the airframe was engineered and built, it's a very easy aeroplane to live with. In fact, it's no more difficult to operate than, say, a Cessna 172. It's simply a matter of doing a fairly careful walk around pre-flight, hop in, start the engines and fly away. It doesn't need the sort of support infrastructure that you would expect of an aircraft of this size and type. The flight from England to Australia was long and gruelling, but effectively uneventful, until near Sumatra, a tiny little spring in one of the distributors decided to let go. The spring was worth about 30 cents. That allowed the engine to go to full advance, and because of the general noise, it wasn't possible for the pilots to hear, and the aircraft ultimately broke a piston in the right engine. A forced landing was made in a paddy field, and once again the aircraft showed up its huge structural integrity by taking a number of bounces over 2-foot high paddy bungs across this field and remaining effectively totally unscathed. An engine was flown from Australia, and there was a spare engine waiting just in case something went wrong in the Nomad. It was installed in the aircraft. The locals in Sumatra came out in force and opened up a takeoff runway, and the Vimy was airborne and continued on her way. Now, that in itself was quite a remarkable achievement. This is a big aeroplane, not easy to conduct a forced landing and to squeeze it down into a fairly small paddock, particularly considering it had about 12 hours worth of fuel aboard. But it did the job quite happily, got itself airborne and continued on its merry way. The pictures you're looking at now are of the Vimy arriving at the Airshow, which was the genesis for this video, at Archerfield, and at the end of October. And the ones you're looking at now are some air-to-air pictures that we shot whilst the aircraft was flying down the coast from Archerfield to Coffs Harbour. It subsequently went on to open the new airport at Mascot Runway, at Kingsford Smith Runway. It then did a tour down to Adelaide for the Grand Prix, visited a number of interim airfields, and was greeted and welcomed most enthusiastically by the people who were there wherever it went. The crew were feted and had superb hospitality all around Australia, as they did throughout the rest of the world. And it now sits in a hangar at Luscantire in the Hunter Valley, awaiting its fate. Now, I had a chance to fly aboard the Vimy during its very last flight from Rutherford to Luscantire. Unfortunately, a very short flight. I was in the front cockpit shooting the pictures that you're looking at now of Lang Kidby flying the aircraft and the engines running, etc. I did take the viewfinder away from my eye for long enough to sort of sit back and absorb the overall feeling. And the nearest thing that I can compare it to is flying in a square-rigged sailing ship. This really is an imposing machine. In fact, you almost have the impression of 3 or 4 tiger moths flying in tight formation. That really is what it's like. It flies beautifully. It pops off the ground in very short distance. It's very tractable. The only negative flying quality it has, according to Lang, is that it's very heavy in the ailerons, and if it drops a wing, you use as much rudder as you have to pick the wing up, and then if you run out of rudder, you then swing your shoulders into the wheel to move the ailerons across. But apart from that, it's a very, very easy aeroplane to fly. Now, there are a lot of people involved in this project. It was done effectively on a shoestring. The people who were involved are owed well over $1 million by the project, but it was carried through with such professionalism and with such enthusiasm that it will sit alongside the achievements of Sir Charles Kingsford Smith and of Ross and Keith Smith among the annals of aviation history. This was quite a remarkable achievement, and it's a shame that we in Australia weren't able to see it as clearly as we should have. Because it wasn't a particularly sensational event, our media largely ignored it, and to be quite honest, I believe our media has lost the plot, and that's just one evidence of that. And apart from a bit of a flurry of excitement over the forced landing in Sumatra, which was variously reported as a crash landing with injuries and things like that by a media which quite deliberately is totally ignorant of aviation and the way in which it works. They don't know aviation terminology, and they don't seem to care to want to unless something bad happens. This really was a remarkable achievement, and when we regain our senses as a nation, I'm sure that, as I said, this achievement will stand alongside those of Kingsford Smith and Ross and Keith Smith. Now, the people involved were Lang Kidby and Peter McMillan, who were the driving force behind the project. Bill Whitney was the engineer. Wayne Daly and his crew did a superb job of engineering in Brisbane.
Really a simple aircraft.
Peter McMillan's crew, including Dan Nelson in America, built the wings and erected and covered and painted the aeroplane. Wayne Daly, just getting back to Wayne, engineered the engines, tuned them to give their maximum torque at 4,000 revs, and also designed and built the superb epicyclic gearboxes. Dick Sweetapple built the 2 propellers, which performed impeccably right throughout the whole thing, and the team was backed up by Lang's wife Bev, who handled all the infrastructure and all the bureaucratic nonsense that they had to go through. By the way, the trip took about twice as long as the original, simply because they were held up by bureaucracy in the various countries that they visited. Well, Lang and Bev, not many people know that this has been a joint husband and wife effort. And Bev, you've accompanied the Vimy all the way from San Francisco, haven't you?
I certainly have, Chris, yes, all the way.
And what's been your job in the overall project?
I've been looking after all the financial side of the trip, and also the administration.
Right. And you've done a fair bit of the flying as well, haven't you?
Well, I don't know, not hands-on flying, but I've certainly been passenger all the way, and I've been in one of the support aircraft.
Well, Peter tells us that you flew at about 2,500 feet. It must have been a wonderful sightseeing platform.
It certainly was, yes. We've certainly seen the whole of the world, all landscapes, right from England to here today at Darcherfield.
Well, Lang, from what you say, you've had to concentrate on flying a somewhat intractable aeroplane, but you enjoyed the trip?
Oh yes, we enjoyed it. It was very hard work. It's very physical work. But it's very satisfying to have built the aeroplane and brought it here. And Peter and I have been very pleased with the results of the whole thing. It's turned out almost exactly as we had planned, and we couldn't have asked for better.
Well, that's wonderful. What have been some of the reactions from people at the various places you've stopped at, seeing a 1917 designed aeroplane suddenly appear out of the blue and land perfectly normally?
We've had huge crowds wherever we went, right across the world. It didn't matter which country we were in. We always attracted a large amount of attention, and everyone is interested in historical aviation. Even when we were in our paddy field in Sumatra there, people had never seen an aircraft up close. They'd only seen them flying over. And we had crowds of thousands every day around the aeroplane. So everyone is interested, and as you can see from the crowd here, unfortunately we've taken a lot away from the actual display flying. We're very pleased that this aircraft is such a high visible machine, and maybe Ross and Keith Smith can get their place further reinforced in Australian history.
Yes.
We've probably had less maintenance on this aircraft than any. We had 2 turbine aircraft with us, a Nomad and an Islander, carrying National Geographic film crews along, and the 2 modern turbine aircraft gave more problems than the Vimy did. But the engines are perfect. The gearboxes designed here in Australia have given no problem, because obviously we've got to get these big propellers down to a very slow speed. So we're running our engines around about 4,000 revs and our propellers at something less than 1,000. The whole combination has just worked perfectly, and we hope that they may be used in other light aircraft in the future.
Lang, you made this trip, this huge undertaking, in order to commemorate 2 aviators who sort of have been overshadowed by people such as Lindbergh and Charles Kingsford Smith. Tell us a little bit about the Smith brothers.
Well, Ross and Keith Smith really deserve a larger place in history. Ross was one of Australia's most decorated servicemen during the First World War. As an infantryman or a light horseman, before he even started flying, flew with Lawrence of Arabia, did several long flights immediately after the First World War. He would have gone on to be one of the world's greatest pilots, and as you're probably aware, as soon as he did the England to Australia flight, he returned to England and was unfortunately killed while testing an aircraft around the world flight. His brother Keith, of course, became very famous, a businessman of great renown, the Vickers representative on the board of Qantas for nearly 40 years after that flight. So the potential of Ross was lost by his death, but the flight itself was the beginning of all long-distance flight, and all airlines owe their beginnings to the flight that Ross and Keith Smith made, and that's what we're commemorating.
Well, it's a magnificent achievement. I consider it an honour to been able to talk to you today and to have been privy to the project from the beginning, and I trust that it all turns out the way that you hope it will, and I believe Australia really can't afford to let this aeroplane go to any other country.
Well, we'd really like to see this aircraft stay in Australia, and we're looking at all sorts of ways that we can do that. Obviously, it's been a very expensive exercise, and we just have to convince people with the wherewithal that this aircraft should become a part of Australia's heritage and continue to fly in Australia for the next 20 years.
It looks a complex aeroplane, Dan, but it isn't
Right.
really. I mean, it's a big Tiger Moth with 2 engines, isn't it?
That's
really?
correct, that's correct. It's really a simple aircraft when it comes right down to it. Everything's out and open. You keep your eyes on it and pay attention to what's
Yes.
going on. She stays together fine.
What was your average altitude?
Oh, probably 2,500 feet.
All the way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, what a wonderful sightseeing platform.
I'm
Saw
glad
the
you
whole
didn't go
world.
I'm glad you didn't go any higher than that,
Yeah.
because I was cold enough there.
Yeah, Dan usually sits in the back, and that seat obviously gets a lot of propeller wash, and
Yeah,
it's even
of course.
colder.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. The aircraft now sits in a hangar in Luskin Tyre. Expressions of interest have been sought in its purchase. It really should stay in Australia, and it should continue to fly. It's proven beyond any shadow of doubt that it's a perfectly operable aeroplane, that it's safe to fly, that it's strong enough to absorb anything that it's likely to be asked to absorb, and it's a piece of flying history which should be seen in Australia's skies on into the future. Whether that'll happen or not is in doubt. I don't know if our CAA is capable of appreciating what this aircraft means, allowing it to fly in the way in which it should. Only time will tell. But my congratulations, and I'm sure those of all aviation enthusiasts, go to Lang Kidby, to Peter McMillan, to the whole crew for a magnificent achievement and a job well done.
Queensland Senator, spent most of his time in the Senate in Canberra, and we know his spare time. I just got in the wheelchair yesterday. Make it most of the money.
Well, Carl, you've given Australia something as far as our heritage is concerned that nobody else has been able to do. You've given her a Spitfire, which is in the colours of one of the Australian squadrons during the Second World War.
That's right, yeah. The ones when they operated in Darwin, it was these colours. I just didn't put a squadron number on it, that's all.
Right. You acquired the aircraft quite a long time ago. In fact, I remember it in Bankstown. I used to go to sleep in the cockpit when it was hanging in Sid Marshall's hangar.
Yeah, I bought it in 80... Oh, I'm trying to think now, 82 or 83, something like that. 82. Or 81, 82, because 82, yep, and because it took three and a half years to get it flying, and it flew in 85. So
was it a difficult restoration?
Very difficult.
From what point of view? Lack of spares?
Just very, anyone's lifetime, you only want to build one Spitfire, I think.
Well, it got you started on a real warbird career. How many are in the stable now?
8.
And what are they? What are the types?
Tiger moth, a chipmunk, bird dog, T6, Mustang, Spitfire, Kitty Hawk, and Dragonfly A37B.
Wonderful. Gee, so you've got a little jet as well.
Mm.
And how do you like that? Have you flown that yet?
Oh yeah.
I actually had a fly in one of those out of New Orleans a few years ago, and I was most impressed with it. A great little aeroplane.
Yeah, it depends whether you flew the A37 or the T37.
I think it was the T.
Oh, no comparison.
Is that right, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was most impressed
One's
with
a
this.
trainer and one's a ground attack aeroplane.
And getting back to the Spitfire, what's her history?
Well, it was the last bit to come to Australia in the war and never come out of the box. And then we went to Sydney Tech College. We went from there to Sid Marshall to Jack, and Jack to me.
I started my aircraft ground engineer's apprenticeship in 1957 at Sydney, with Qantas at Sydney Tech, and this airframe was in Sydney Tech at that time.
There was 2 of them, this one and the sister one.
Yes, yeah. That's right, yeah, there were the two airframes. What happened to the other one?
It went to England.
Did it?
Yeah.
Is it flying again?
Just about, I think. Rob's Lamprey's got it in
Right.
England. Yeah.
Right. Well, Cole, thanks once again for giving us this aeroplane. I never thought when I was young that I'd see a Spitfire in Australian skies. The remarkable thing about it is it's the sort of aeroplane that you can just about hop in and go, can't you? I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't really require much ground support. The engine's reliable.
Yeah, no, it's a very good aeroplane, yeah. But just unbelievable that we had so many at the end of the war and we've got so few now.
I don't think people realise what they were going to represent, because as I was saying to Guido, they were the last of the big piston engines, and they were the ultimate refinement of big piston engines, and the airframes that they pulled around really their likes will never be seen again.
Yeah. The thing is that, you know, we had about between 500 and 600 Spits at the end of the war and about the same in Kitty Hawks.
And they've all gone.
All gone.
All gone to scrap.
Yep.
Terrible shame. Thanks for talking to us, Cole.
Okay, thank you.
relatively small population, we're very fortunate in Australia to have a number of rare and in some cases unique aircraft. Now, among the ones that we've looked at in recent years, and of course we're constantly looking for new subjects to put onto video and to show in Chris Conroy's Leisure World, is the Scottish Aviation Twin Pioneer. It's owned privately by Peter Flanagan, who's based on the Gold Coast, and Peter uses the aircraft for private charters and for joy flights and that sort of thing. And it's a wonderful experience to fly in the old twin pin. She has a pair of Alvis Leonides radial engines, and she is a true short takeoff and landing aircraft. So she's able to squeeze into short rough strips, which makes our enjoyment of the aeroplane much greater because we can get into remote areas. Peter has a second aircraft. In fact, he probably owns more twin pins than anybody else in the world. And about a year ago, we had the opportunity to shoot the twin pin, which is around 40 years old, in company with the very latest production of Scottish aviation, which is the Jetstream. Now, you'll notice in this shot that the twin pin is in a shallow dive and the Jetstream is nose up and nibbling on the stall in order to stay back with her. And that gives you some idea of the advancements in the last 40 years or so in twin-engine passenger-carrying aeroplanes. But that takes nothing away from the twin pin, which can do an awful lot of things that the Jetstream can't do. It just does everything very much slower. Another unique aircraft, and this one really is unique, it's the only one in the world, also based on the Gold Coast, is the Grumman Agcat on floats. That was modified by Ken Keane at Coolangatta, and it's used for joy flights off the Broadwater, and of course it has the advantage of having twin cockpits or being able to seat two people in the front cockpit, so you can take a friend with you in a biplane joy flight. That really is an experience, and the old Agcat handles superbly off the water. Now, Australia is an air-minded nation, or let me modify that. Australia used to be an air-minded nation. Australia was opened up by aircraft because of our huge distances and very difficult terrain. Aircraft really were the only way in which Australia could be opened up. And I guess the fact that we have the only flying doctor service in the world points up the fact that we do rely on aircraft. But it seems to me that in recent times, Australians have lost sight of the fact that we owe an awful lot to aviation. And I know personally of at least 5 small airports that have been shut down in recent years due to complaints about noise. I know of a couple at the moment which are under threat, and I exclude Kingsford Smith Airport because I think that the noise problem from an airport such as that, particularly with a third runaway, certainly gives rise to valid objections. But all of the airports that I've mentioned that have been shut down had been there for many, many years. Urban sprawl had taken place. People had moved into the area, immediately started complaining about the noise, and had these little airfields shut down. And that really is a terrible thing, because apart from the good old Aussie live and let live philosophy, which used to prevail in this country, there's also the fact that they were there first, and that there's also the fact that a small airport which has light aircraft, these are generally either private or semi-privately owned and operated, really has a little flurry of activity in the morning when everybody goes away, and a little in the afternoon when they come back, with maybe a few movements in between. Aircraft don't hang around, they fly away, they fly great distances, so it's not as if you have the noise problem hanging around all the time. And the people who pursue aviation are pursuing an extremely noble thing. Aviation is a wonderful thing to be involved in. As I said a little earlier, I've been involved in it all my life. It's led to me designing and building the little Super Sparrow here. In fact, I'm just fitting a new engine to her at the moment so I can fly her at an air show shortly. And it's stood me in excellent stead all the way through my life. It's taught me an awful lot about technology, and that knowledge has been applied to all other aspects of technology. And it's given me a sense of self-reliance and of purpose. Now, it can do that for everybody, and people who aren't interested in aviation, in my opinion, don't have the right to complain about and to disadvantage those who are interested in aviation. So if you do suffer a noise problem from a little general aviation airport that's in your vicinity, or a private airport, and you don't like the little aeroplanes flying overhead, I promise you they're safer than your motor car is. The people who are doing it are generally very nice people. They're members of a worldwide fraternity. Please grit your teeth, try and see something positive in the activities of the general aviation fraternity and support them rather than trying to stop them. That about wraps us. I have a lot of people to thank for the production of this video. It was a great thrill to shoot some of the warbird pictures that you saw. We actually flew out to a peak in the Brisbane Valley and shot a 2,000 feet high peak. Jeff McTaggart flew us out in his helicopter. We landed on top of the peak and set the cameras up, and we were able to shoot those totally unique pictures. And I guess in a way there is a lot of standards to aspire to when you're producing a video such as this. It's not easy to shoot aircraft which are flying in a way which actually puts you near them or in the cockpit. And I think we went very close to achieving that in our top of the mountain shoot, and we'll be doing a lot more of that. The only thing I'm unhappy about is the fact that because of the weather, when we were in Scone and shot the air-to-air pictures that you see of Cole Pace Mustang, because the weather was bad, we weren't able to shoot the Spitfire. The Spitfire is a little difficult on the ground, more so than most other warbirds because of her narrow track undercarriage. And Cole simply wasn't prepared to fly in a 30-knot, 30-degree crosswind, and I certainly supported him in that. So I was a little disappointed that we weren't able to get air-to-air of my favourite aeroplane, the Spitfire. But Cole has assured us that when we're there and the weather's right, he'd be more than happy to fly for us, to fly again for us and fly the Spitfire. I'll keep you posted on what we add to our aviation series from the Chris Conroy's Leisure World video library, and I'll make sure that you know that we have the Spitfire as soon as she's in the can. We'll see you again. Happy landings.